Good evening. Can I just take a minute to welcome you all and really just say a big, big thank you to Paolo Antonelli. You know Paolo, all of you, because Paola has been teaching here an incredible course. She's a wonderful friend of the school, and we're so happy that she has helped to put this salon, one of her many salons, here at the GST with an incredible group of people. I have been such a big admirer of Paola's work. As you know, she's the senior curator of design at MoMA. And I think what has been so amazing for me always is her foresight, the way that she actually enters the field of design with so much focus and always with a fresh eye. And I'm so delighted that she's here this semester, and I hope that she will continue to be with us for a long time to come. So please welcome Paolo Antonelli, who will introduce the panel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Moisen, for this great introduction, and welcome to all of you tonight. So great to be here at the GST, especially to talk about such a live topic, such a live wire topic. And you'll see there's a wonderful congress of speakers with us tonight. So these salons, this format is something that I've tested at MoMA for a while. This is actually I have to say 16 and a half, because the number after 16 is considered not lucky in Italy. So the 16 and a half salon. And I usually try to find topics that are very urgent to the real world and in which our institutions, MoMA or the Harvard GSD, have some expertise, and try to see what we can do to advance a little bit the discussion. Of course, hybridity is such an important topic, especially because of the space in between what is hybrid. You know, there are many different ways to tackle hybridity. One can talk about hybrid people, but it's the spaces that provoke, engender, and continue hybridity that are sometimes the most interesting one. What do we think of when we think of hybrids today? Let's think of the stereotypes of hybrids. Well, we often think of hybrid beings. Usually it's man, machine, or artificial intelligence. And here are a few examples of the various degrees from Sophie de Oliveira Barata, who's an artist in London that makes these amazing artificial limbs that make a person from disabled to you wish you had a chance to wear my arm, don't you? Or Amy Mullins, who is a double amputee that's become an icon in fashion and in art, you see her with her cheetah legs that got her friend Oscar Pistorius disqualified for being over-abled as opposed to normally abled in the Olympic Games. Well, Pistorius has a different history going on right now, but that's when he became famous first. And then on the right-hand side, you see the legs that Alexander McQueen made for her and that she walked on the runway with a few years ago. In the middle is Hugh Herr, who is the director of the Department of Biomechatronics at the MIT Media Lab. He's working on limbs that actually behave as your limbs of yesteryear, and even better. So you can have a normal gait, you can climb stairs, and even more than that. Then we have Neil Harbison, one of the first real cyborgs. He was born without any sense of color, so he implanted a microchip in his brain that transforms color into sounds and sends sounds to his central brain, so he can actually hear a symphony of colors. Moon Ribas is a performer that has a microchip implanted that makes her feel like a seismograph, earthquakes that are happening around the world. And then, of course, we have the artificial intelligence stereotype of ex machina. So the hybrid man-machine, human-machine, is one of the cliches when we think of hybridity today. And another one is the T-shaped individual. You know, that's it's another form of hybridity that we discuss a lot. T-shaped are individuals that have a general knowledge and then a more in-depth knowledge in other disciplines that come together with this kind of necklace of T's. And in fact, the recent PopTech, the conference PopTech that happened in Camden, Maine just 2 weeks ago, was devoted to the theme of hybrids. And it was based on this idea. It was a container for hybrids of all kinds. And John Maeda, who ran it, is the hybrid par excellence. You know, if we're talking about the slash generation, he has not even slashes. He has like several lives that he's carried on, not at the same time, but one after the other. Hybridity today also comes in many different products and configuration and formats. I'm particularly enthralled by the B Corporation. As you know, if you've seen the readings, I put 2 readings about the For Benefit Corporation because I find it such an amazing hybrid of 2 things that shouldn't be together, which is corporate profit and social benefit. So the whole biological idea of hybrid is 2 species that are not meant to be together, but come together sometimes with advantageous results. So the B Corporation for me is one of those instances. Then we have Fusion Kitchen, hybrid cars, the mashups that greeted you into the auditorium tonight, thanks to our great colleagues here at Harvard GSD, the idea of interdisciplinarity in universities and the cross-pollination that is now preached by any consultant, any corporate consultant you will find. So there are all these different ideas of hybridity that are bandied around, sometimes without thinking about it too much. And they all come from this biological concept of putting 2 species together. But there's another type of hybridity that is very relevant to us today because it goes from the individual and the speciation to the creation of a different space. Harvard, in particular, is a hotbed of study of this particular form of hybridity, and it's the kind of hybridity that is based on the studies of race and on post-colonial studies in particular. What you're seeing here are kind of scary taxonomies from the 17th century. One is the casta painting, a casta painting on the left-hand side done in Spain that kind of shows all the different possible miscegenations and mixture of colonizers and colonized in South America. In the 17th and 18th century. And on the right-hand side, you have the Myers Lexicon, the German encyclopedia, from the end of the 20th century, and you see all of the different classifications of Asian people. So the idea that you can taxonomize and put people in their place. Chantel Blakely, who helped put together this salon, who's here at the GSD today, had a beautiful insight. She said, these look like tarot cards. What you see is what you get. If you get given that card, that's the species that you can get out or beyond, but that's what you're given. The post-colonialist studies that are here, especially represented by Homi Bhabha, I love that picture over there of Homi, talk about the colonial subject located in a place of hybridity. And his identity is formed in a liminal space that is defined by the colonizer. So the idea that there's a space where you are forced to perform as a hybrid, where you're forced to adapt until you can go beyond it, is something that's been really initiated by Homi, who's here at Harvard, and then there are other great people speaking about it, like Gayatri Spivak. And one of our speakers tonight is also going to talk about this kind of liminal space between races and amongst races. And he's going to talk in particular about the Cosmopolitan Canopy. You see there the Down Home Diner in Philadelphia, which is a place where people that are different racially, in a different background, come in and start talking to each other, start having common ground. So it's interesting to see how we went from separation to the idea of hybrid space in post-colonialist studies to the cities of today. The melting pot, what I'm showing there is a beautiful illustration by Sophie Blackall of the subway in New York City and the Cosmopolitan Canopies. All the way to inquiries like this by National Geographic. It was a beautiful story by Martin Scholler talking about the interracial kids of today. It was a real survey that was trying to really understand what is so intriguing in these faces and in these pages. So the U.S. Census Bureau has collected detailed data on multiracial people only since 2000. But in 10 years, that number jumped to 32%, the people that could not cross out only one square, calling themselves either Caucasian or Black or Hispanic. It jumped 32%. So this space of hybridity has to change together with how the social conditions are changing. But the interesting thing is that the last salon that I did at MoMA was about fluidity of gender and race. It was called Fluid States of America. America. And during that salon, I came to understand that the idea of fluidity and of social mobility through hybridity and hybrid spaces is intrinsic to the whole idea of the American dream and has to be defended and has to be nurtured. So it's not only in the corporate space, but also in the political space that we have to really be careful about nurturing it. And if you want to see the Salon on Fluidity, which is very connected to this, there's the MoMA R&D website, and the salon is there. I think you'd enjoy it. When it comes to architecture, I was looking, of course, at Complexity and Contradiction by Robert Venturi and his praise of hybridity, but in a way, this is still a biological idea of hybridity. It's about seeing how complexity is best understood by means of different styles coming together and things that are not pure, but rather hybrid, not clean, but rather compromising, not straightforward, but rather distorted. So trying to see the interstices and the liminal spaces in the buildings and in styles. That book, for those of you here who are not architects, probably there's like 5 of you, you know very well that it was a truly groundbreaking study that not only revealed so much about architecture, but also pushed the whole world of architecture forward in its search for a life after modernism. Right now, architects, designers, artists, broadcasters live in another space in between, another hybrid space. This light that I love so much, it's by Kevin Slavin, and it's already a few years old, as you can see from the QR tag in the middle, which at this point is only used on the Acela trains. But the idea is that you have the static terrestrial, the media. Also, you can see there's Maxim magazine. Also, that is a sign of the times. So the magazines and terrestrial media, and then digital media. But most of us live in the space in between, and that's really the space that we were trying to address with this conversation. These are 2 examples of the use of the space in between, kind of old ones, but it goes to show you that you don't have to have the best technology in order to be comfortable in between. On the left-hand side, you have a Pac-Man-like game that was played with an old Motorola cell phone in the street of the West Village, and the ghost, the Papa Samedi that wanted to eat you, was only on the Motorola cell phone, but you would run for your life because you felt that something was going to really eat you. And on the right-hand side, you see this website that was launched by the BBC that superimposed historical event onto your own home terrain. So you would see that the walk on the moon of Apollo 11 was just a walk around the block, and instead the Gulf spill, the oil spill, would cover almost all of London, if not more. So it was a way to really make you use your in-between perception. Of course, augmented reality is one of the uses of our hybrid perception of space that is pushed most forward. This is a pretty old, it's from 2010 video that was in 3D, hence the kind of like dissociated view, and it's Hiromi Ozaki in it that is demonstrating augmented reality for a colleague of yours. And instead, here at the bottom, you see the City Smell research by Cecil Tolas, another kind of hybrid space in between physical and sensorial, perhaps. And synesthesia has become a way for so many people to talk about hybrid space today. Hybrid exists also in design. I love Hela Jongerius and how she can take old and new Africa and Europe and merge them in hybrids that are completely seamless and very new. Every European designer that's gone to Africa has become enamored with the 3-legged stool with the high back, and usually they come back and they make exactly the same thing. And instead, Hela transformed it into a carbon fiber foldable stool, therefore understanding in depth the meaning of the stool and not just mimicking it. Or you see there from 2001, so a long time ago, her idea of a TV dinner of that time. So you would have a TV tray for dinner, but it would have a keyboard. So it was her way to merge that kind of idea. Art, same thing, the in-between space. Relational aesthetics, of course, it's one of the declaration of an embrace of the space in between on the side of artists. The work of art does not exist unless the viewer, participant, lover, and embracer really becomes part of it. It doesn't exist otherwise. But even in the museum, from the point of the museum, we have to embrace that space in between. This is how people view and experience art today. I don't see any problem with it, and so and the same don't many of my colleagues, but there are some people that are still really upset by this in-betweenness and this mediation. So hybrid space coming from this idea of merging of different worlds, especially the digital and physical, is one of the aspects that are most important for architects. So it seems that hybridity has helped us get through so many different spots, difficult spots. You know, the hybridity for post-colonialism, hybridity for post-humanism with the cyborg idea, hybridity for postmodernism with the idea of, you know, from Venturi and Scott Brown, and also what we see today with the hybrid space of digital and physical. So is hybrid really a panacea? Is it something that is going to cure all and help all? Is it the real evolutionary advantage? Not necessarily. And to discuss this tonight, we have a great group of speakers. And we're going to start with Elijah Anderson, who's a great urban ethnographer and a professor of sociology at Yale. Then after him will be Eric de Broche-de-Combe. I'm sure that you know him because he teaches here at the GSD, but he's a graphic designer, he's an architect, but also he's a true in-between person, not only because he commutes once a week from France, but also because he is able to really embrace the two spaces and bring them together, also with his music career. Then will come Jane Fulton Suri, who is the creative director and also one of the founding principals of IDEO, who has been bringing the social sciences into design. She was among the very, very first people to embrace the need to have social sciences within design practice. And last but not least, Alexa Clay. You see her there in character with her Amish alter ego. She'll tell us more about it. She just published The Misfits Economy, which is a great book that speaks about being a misfit today in the workplace. So I would like to invite Professor Elijah Anderson first, and after that we will all sit together after the 4 presentations, and I'm sure that you have all read the reading list that I sent you because it was so short and concise, so we will be able to have a conversation after that. Thank you very much, Professor Anderson.
Well, good evening, good evening. Well, we've come a long way in this country racially since slavery. We've had the Emancipation Proclamation. We've had the Great Migration to cities. We've had the Civil Rights Movement, which culminated in the riots all over this country. City after city burned. And we've had the racial incorporation process. And today we have the largest black middle class in American history. And we also have had immigration, tremendous immigration over the past 40 years from colored countries and white countries, giving cities a diverse cast, so to speak. And this has given rise to the cosmopolitan canopy, this island of civility and a sea of racial segregation. We still have a lot of work to do. See, the racial segregation gives rise to the iconic ghetto. The iconic ghetto. See, the black ghetto, through the years, has become iconic. But it's also a very powerful source of stereotype, prejudice, and discrimination. And black skin is associated with the ghetto and with poverty. And the black middle class has the same phenotype as people living in the ghetto. The black body moves about in the larger society with a deficit of credibility that has nothing to do with the talent, the merit, the respectability even of the person, but everything to do with the fact that that black person is not white, you see. You see these police shootings today? That's what we're talking about, you see. And not just with the police shootings, but all kinds of powerful, powerful insults that black people get all about, who are out of their place, quote unquote. Even though we've had this incorporation process, doctors and lawyers, professors at Yale, but you have the same phenotype as people in the hood. And so there are these dilemmas and contradictions of status, you see. Skip Gates at Harvard, who gets arrested for breaking into his own house. Black people call this, and I don't want to offend anybody, but black people call this the nigger moment. The nigger moment. The moment of acute disrespect based on one's particularity. And they can belittle, and you deal with those. And they can be big. And the big ones can get you killed. The big ones can make you change your life. The big ones can leave you totally demoralized. And very emphatically, they tell you that you don't belong. That's what black people are dealing with right now today. And yet, in my field work in Philadelphia and other places around the world and around the country, we have the cosmopolitan canopy. The cosmopolitan canopy. It's that island of civility and diversity in a sea of racial segregation. That island of civility in the sea of racial segregation. And under the canopy, you've got, it's a beautiful scene. With social laws, people are very nice and pleasant to one another. It's a metaphor for civil society. And while you have people of any race who are deeply, deeply committed to a cosmo orientation, you also have people sharing that space who are deeply, deeply ethnocentric, you see. And these two categories operate under the canopy. If you're deeply cosmo, it's not much work. But if you're deeply ethnocentric or parochial, you have to work in order to fit under the canopy. But there are circumstances in which the gloss, the social gloss that you use to navigate the scene, erodes, you see. When you're confronted by a biracial couple, a white man kissing a black woman, or two gay men kissing each other, it can erode the gloss. And that's when the ethno comes out and creates these moments of acute disrespect for people who are marginalized, you see. See, the nigger moment can happen to anybody. It can happen to a Jew, it can happen to a woman, it can happen to a black person, it can happen to a Muslim. They don't call it the nigger moment, but it's a moment of acute disrespect based on your particularity, you see. And even though we have the canopy, we still have these moments of acute disrespect. Not expected so much under the canopy. The nigger moment is really expected in the white space. The white space. And I'll wrap up. And you can read the piece I wrote called The White Space. If you Google my name and The White Space, you can get it for free. So I won't have to elaborate. But the white space, well, you know what the white space is. Well, the white space is the space in society that's basically absent of black people. You see? Universities, restaurants, public parks, white neighborhoods, and the countryside. In the South, black people are very wary of the countryside. White space. White space is a perceptual category, you see, like these other categories, perceptual categories. So some people it's quite diverse. But for black people, it's the white space. So they problematize it as the white space, you see. And the white space is interesting in that you expect, as a black person, these moments of acute disrespect. You expect that, so you're really on your guard. But you don't expect them so much in civil society or under the canopy. So when you run into these, they're deeply humiliating and sometimes deeply puzzling. But sometimes when they happen, they encourage black people who would be Cosmo to have second thoughts. Maybe I don't belong in this space. Maybe I belong somewhere else. Anyway, we can develop this during the conversation, but thank you.
Okay, so now you will see a French guy making a fool of himself in front of an audience. Well, first, I'm a bit jet-lagged, so my English will be probably horrific. But remember that I'm speaking French, so I have some sort of advantage. Anyway, so now if it turns really bad, I will speak French. Well, it will be of a lighter tone, I have to say. Like I did a quick presentation. It's a bit chaotic because it's not simple to define hybridity, and I feel like I am hybrid, so it's even worse to try to define yourself because it's complex, and the more complex it's becoming, the less you seem to know. So at the very beginning, I had lots of ideas, and the more I was working, the less I have. So I hope that I will have a flash and that I will eventually say something intelligent. It's not starting super well, but let's see that. Okay, so it's a quick presentation. So, well, this young guy is me when I had a lot of hair. And in the back, you can see my mother in bikini, which is kind of very unconventional. I love this image because actually it's a very hybrid image because I have no idea why my mother is wearing an afro and is in bikini. No kidding. And there must be a story around that. And it turns out that it is a very interesting image as well because it's telling a story that even I ignore. I mean, it's probably a part of being hybrid is not knowing exactly what has happened to you. Yeah, this is my father. He was a nice guy. He was a teacher as well. So, I was born in the Cité Radieuse in Marseille, the famous building by Le Corbusier. And it was extremely interesting because the building in the 70s was kind of a modern ruin. And it turns out that there were a lot of misfits, because I will use this term now, thanks to you, that were living here, and mostly they were programmers and mathematicians, and actually people that were believing in computer while it was not exactly the right time. And I have been introduced to computers very, very early. I was literally fascinated by the fact that people were sleeping under their desk, that they were eating pizza most of the time. In Marseille, we have good pizza. And that they had so much power. I mean, the fact that you could compute, that you could play, that I just found my tool. Yeah, I was a weird kid as well. I was the only one not drawing suns and flowers and everything. I was 3 at that period, and I was doing very well geometrical form. I've been a huge center of interest for lots of psychologists. I don't know why. I don't know exactly what it is, but I was 3. Okay, these days, most of my work is actually to represent architecture. It turns out that I'm not really interested into real architecture because I hate gravity. I think gravity is bad. And what is nice with drawings is that actually you can make people dream without the hassle of the cost, the gravity, and things like that. And I've been more influenced by images than I can be by buildings. And being an architect for intelligent people, so I graduated, but it was a fluke. So I'm glad I'm using a computer now too. I'm teaching at the GSD for like 3 years now, 4 years. I'm having a class about immersive landscape, which is a representation of landscape through the video game technology. It's what is actually interesting, and this is what I wanted to do at the GSD, is that I think that architects are also good at building virtual worlds. So it's not like I'm initiating architects to tools. It's more than I want architects to actually invade that space that will be virtual. Damn, I miss French. It would be so more intelligent in French. That's lacking vocabulary. So we did create, so I had a lot of talented students, and they did create very hybrid space, including spaces that were existing and that were transformed into something else. Here you can see a project, I think it was from my first class, of students actually building a Garden of Eden into the classroom. And it was a great experience. I mean, it was, well, I tend to be emotive, and I cried this day. To me, the ultimate hybrid figure is Elvis Presley, because, yeah.
You're at 5.
I have what?
You have 2 more minutes.
2 more. Okay, faster. So the ultimate figure is Elvis Presley, you know, a white guy singing black songs, or even singing country via satellites in Hawaii. I mean, this is the perfect product of the modern world. Even a bit naughty if you see the slides. Yeah, well, I'm French, I'm sorry. So there is the good old Albert. And I think that the second sentence is actually perfectly true. That we know to do it, but we don't exactly know what it is. And it's because it's very complex, and that we have rose a lot the capacity of understanding that we have. And I have to say that the more I'm getting old, the more I'm interested into Freud, because I think that he has literally invented the world that is it now. Back to the game. Damn, can I have 1 more minute? Okay, thank you. This is as well something that I find is really interesting, is that this space is not that virtual, because actually 99% of the feelings that you have in a game are real. I mean, if you have electrodes on you, the fear will be the exact same fear as in real life. Everything is kind of, and if you add drugs to the thing, like Huxley, then you can have the real pain and the real, exhaustion and everything. So it's very close. Virtual life is actually very close to real life. Here you can see World of Warcraft. It's 10 years I'm playing World of Warcraft. I'm literally living into World of Warcraft. I'm not playing, but I'm just wandering around. I like it. And you can even get married in World of Warcraft. It's much more easier than in real life. You have in this virtual space, you have large spaces that are fantastic. I wanted to actually to ride a horse because of this game. I never succeeded, but I was like, I'm the best at riding horses in game. And what is nice is that these large spaces are actually, they are demanding very, very little space. So it means that it could solve a lot of the problem. You know, if you don't have to go out and you are living in virtual spaces, you don't need a lot of space. It's cool. Also interesting is the political aspects of all this. Is that for example, the ISIS movement using a game that was developed by Europeans to fight against the Western way of life. I mean, this is just fascinating what is happening. It seems like hybridity has no limits, no bias. I'm not finished, but it's as well, there are some nice moments. For example, this is the empathy. This game is fantastic for empathy. All the kids should play it. Faster, faster. And it's because of the computer. I mean, the computer made us completely hybrid. But there are this moral issue, and I think that most of the hybridity, most of the problem or the solution that it is are actually conveyed by by the Mary Shelley's book. I mean, there is everything in there. All the questions are in there about hybridity, not about everything, of course. And voila. Okay, thank you for the minutes.
Hi, so this is me with more hair also. Back in 1987, just landed like a fish out of water as a social scientist in a design company with Bill Moggridge and Tim Brown and Naoto Fukasawa and many others. And I have to admit, at that time, it was a really big risk. I felt like a misfit. We had really no idea how we might integrate a social scientist into the world of design. But in those 28 years, I've learned a thing or two. We've learned quite a bit about how to nourish hybrid teams, it's a good thing because we really need them in the kind of work that we're doing and the sort of impact we want to have in the world. So hybridity, we're hearing, is a thing of individuals. It's also a thing of groups. I really love this picture. It's from our Cambridge studio, which is just down the street. And you're looking at Danny, who's got his back to you. He is himself a hybrid designer, interaction designer, hacker, music artist. He's the first to get into any kind of new approach or new tools that are available. And he's looking at an image that he created, which is a composite of the studio a few years ago. So his colleagues, MBAs, architects, documentary filmmakers, designers, engineers, software, hardware. It's a sort of celebration of their collective creativity. And so it's a really nice image about hybridity to me. And yes, I'm going to talk very briefly about 5 things that I think that we've learned about how to nurture productive collaborative hybrid teams of people from many, many disciplines. So first, this is a team also from our studio in Cambridge, just a few days ago, struggling with a really important technical challenge, I'm serious, to create a very single, perfect bubble that would be emitted from a device. We're designing the device that would emit this bubble when your calendar says it's time for a meeting. So imagine this, time for a meeting, and this perfect bubble rises. It's really, really challenging to do this, and took a team of great technical minds as well as people with the vision. But they've actually managed to do it. And I think a lot of what was behind their success in accomplishing it is to do with the quality of their relationships. They felt really like a peer group. They were mutually admiring and respectful of one another, really delighted with the kind of magic that they could create together, and curious about what each other might contribute. And of course, they had this very clear goal of something that they wanted to do together, that kind of intention to collaborate, which is pretty powerful. Second, this is who are distributors of industrial products. They have technical consumer service people who are absolutely brilliant at what they do. But one thing we discovered was that actually their customers don't like dealing with them very much because they feel like their own expertise is being seriously undermined. And what you're looking at here is an attempt to have a more humble, peer-like attitude, to ask for some expertise from that consumer base. Can you help us identify this compressor? Perhaps together we might be able to work out what it is. And not in a patronizing way, it's real. But I think that this is a really important idea, this idea that quite often people with expertise or people in one group feel like they're responsible to tell people what they know or represent themselves. And I think quite often it's actually more important sometimes to actually not know, or to be more curious, to ask more questions, to tell more stories, to explore together. Third, exploring together, I think we already talked about finding common ground. And one of the ways of doing that is to do things together that are leveling. So you're looking at a team here of designers and clients who are working on a project about the future of mobility. And they've rented an RV to make a tour of California to immerse themselves in that car culture. Something that's interesting, you know, then they're all, it's important with these kinds of activities that this isn't something that somebody's done before. Everybody's on the same level and in discovery mode together, so that their unique perceptions can be shared and the group can be excited about, and they're enlightening to the team. Fourth is about getting real. Here with synthetic biologists exploring what capabilities might be, and building an idea around programming E. coli bacteria to be sensitive to specific wavelengths of light so that we could actually grow forms. And I think that's about, really, it's never too soon to start giving form to things, because that inspires new ideas about what can happen, and there can be a real conversation and real ideation around real things. And finally, the power of tools. Here you're looking at nature cards that were produced with a biologist to help bridge the gap between biology and design, to provide common language, to provide an introduction to new concepts. And tools, of course, need to be something that are easy to grab and use, that break the boundaries, that they need affordances that cross disciplinary boundaries. Some would say they're best if they're on your iPhone. And I think computer tools are incredibly powerful in supporting hybrid activity. And I expect we'll come back to that. The common interfaces between different tools that break down what have maybe been traditional specialist tools, democratizing them, is a really, really powerful thing to support hybridity in a healthy, productive way. That's what I wanted to talk about, just those 5 things. Thank you.
Great. So I wanted to share a little bit today about my own misfit journey, which very much started here at Harvard. Both my parents were anthropologists. So my father was associated here with the Peabody Museum and was one of the first people to be part of the fair trade movement. So to really think about connecting indigenous people with livelihood generation opportunities, working with indigenous folks in the Amazon and connecting them with big brands like The Body Shop and Ben & Jerry's. And he was a little bit of an entrepreneur or a misfit in this respect, because he was doing this at a time when, within the field of anthropology, the focus was more on cultural preservation rather than livelihood generation. And meanwhile, my mother, who's here today somewhere in the audience, was traveling around the world with Dr. John Mack investigating alien abduction. So speaking to people who felt they'd been abducted by aliens. You should definitely ask her about that later. But for me as an 8-year-old, this was terrifying. The prospect that aliens were out there as I was trying to distinguish between sort of Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and what is the difference between sort of fantasy and reality, I never knew. And so I think this gave me a profound ability to sort of manage discomfort and unknowns. At the same time, part of me that was a little bit vain, wished that I had been abducted somehow. Like if aliens were out there, why couldn't I be the chosen ambassador of the human race? So that really perplexed me. And I think from my youth, I was always really interested in these different worlds coming together. The phenomenon of alien abduction at Harvard in itself was this collision of two worlds that led to a lot of controversy. Certainly this collision of worlds between indigenous people in the Amazon and big brands like The Body Shop and Ben & Jerry's was also very controversial. And so those are some of the themes that I started exploring more, really bringing this anthropological lens into a corporate heart of darkness initially. And so trying to understand who are those misfits, who are those culture hackers within corporate ecosystems. And so for me, this led to this discovery, if you will, of a lost tribe of people around this idea of social entrepreneurship. So the B Corp movement was mentioned earlier, but these are very much people that were trying to bring political and social agendas into multinational companies. And this was an exhausting task. You know, people that were fully self-actualized, proud Amnesty International card-carrying members, people that used to work in microfinance who were suddenly finding themselves with opportunities to work within these multinational ecosystems. And that misfit identity was ultimately one of camouflage. They weren't behaving as whistleblowers. They weren't behaving as saboteurs. They were trying to transform these cultures from within. And so the hybridity that they really had to focus on was what was that culture, what was that agenda that they were trying to bring into these institutions, and also what was the culture that is? What were the politics of those organizations that they were trying to transform? And really knowing very well, how do you pitch, how do you make the business case for your ideas within that kind of landscape? And so some of the different cases that I wanted to share today are really focused on this idea of worlds colliding, and particularly the vocation that I seem to have stumbled upon, which is around creating bridges between these very different types of worlds. So the first example I wanted to mention was really this idea around entrepreneurship. And the book that I wrote, The Misfit Economy, looks at this in a lot more detail, but really focused on this whole entrepreneurial narrative that we don't pay any attention to. Hackers, pirates, gangsters, people in the black market and informal economy have amazing entrepreneurial skills, but are not written about in Harvard Business Review or not seen through the lens of innovation and creativity. They're often denied or pushed away as sort of deviants or others. And so how do we get from this sort of portrait of the entrepreneur as the hoodie-wearing sort of college dropout, the sort of Zuckerberg wunderkind, to actually seeing the incredible entrepreneurial potential in some of these misfit economies? And so I had a number of conversations with people operating in this space. One of the early ones was with King Tone, the former leader of the Latin Kings, a Hispanic street gang. And he completely changed my perception of gangs in the world today. First of all, he wouldn't even let me use the word gang. He said, refer to us like an organization. We have a brand, we have a culture, we do recruitment and retention like any other organization. And he also had a powerful mission. At his time of leadership, he was trying to transform the Latin Kings into a social movement like the Black Panthers. And so saying, how do we take this criminal organization and actually pivot it and allow it to transform into something else? And that objective really had mixed results. Some accused him of a vicious greenwashing campaign. Others that we spoke to within the gang really valued some of the work that he was trying to do in building up the activist credentials of gang members, in building up some of the different employability skills. What if gangs actually became unions or incubators for different employment skills? Another organization that I met really early on in this research is called Defy Ventures. And this was started by a woman called Catherine Hoke, who really operated in very hybrid worlds. During the day, she was worked in the world of venture capital and private equity, and then on the weekends she would volunteer in prisons. And so she was effectively able to create a bridge between these worlds over time, recognizing that some of the people in prison are incredible entrepreneurs who just need to transform their hustle, who need support in working on the other side of the law. So she set up an incubator program that brought real-world entrepreneurial mentors together with prison populations to actually allow them to grow businesses and enterprises within the formal economy. The next story that I wanted to share with you is really about this interdisciplinary hybridity that Paula mentioned early on. And this is a story of Gary Slutkin, who was an infectious disease specialist, a little bit of a late blooming misfit, if you will. He traveled, worked all across Africa in refugee camps, trying to contain malaria, HIV, and AIDS. And then, as with many people in the social change sphere, after 15 years of this work, he burnt out. He went back to Chicago, and he didn't know what to do next. And he started reading the newspaper in Chicago and suddenly realized that the ways in which violence spreads in inner cities actually mimics how infectious disease spreads. And so how could he take all the know-how and discipline that he had learned within the containment of infectious disease and spread that to the treatment of violence? And so as a result, he created a network of violence interrupters, which is really appropriating the community health outreach model that you see within the infectious disease community, and using that as an informal type of mediator between the police and between communities. So anywhere where violence might occur, a community can call the violence interrupters to really help mediate this conflict. And those interrupters are often people that are from these communities that maybe have a previous history of being involved in violence. And so for me, that's a really interesting example of not just someone from the slash generation, but someone who's able to take one discipline and apply it to a totally different field, and someone who's also gotten a lot of pushback because now he's trying to hack the culture of violence. This is an innovation that's spreading to Iraq, to Afghanistan. It's being used around the world. It's being employed in New York by different mayor's offices around the US, but it still has a lot of pushback from people that aren't comfortable in giving up political territory around what they're doing. And the last example that I wanted to end with is around the joyous subculture of LARPing. How many of you know what LARPing is, have LARPed a few? Okay, great. So for those who don't know, maybe you have this idea of LARP as nerdy people running around in the woods with swords. Sometimes that is true, playing zombie apocalypse games and whatnot. But LARP is, for me, actually a transformative and revolutionary medium that allows us to really go into this hybrid liminal space. And I'll say this for two reasons. How can we actually use LARP as a medium for social change? How do we use LARP to prototype emerging cultures? If we want to redesign the financial system, for example, why don't we design a LARP around cryptocurrency or around credit unions? If we want to change and think about new approaches to romantic relationships, why don't we design a LARP around polyamory or something like this? And so for me, how we think about using some of these liminal spaces as a way of actually prototyping alternative futures is really fascinating. And this on the right is a photo of POC 21, which is an immersive experience that I just came back from outside of Paris in a castle in France where over 100 eco-hackers gathered together to basically be a provocation, a sort of anti-COP climate change negotiation talks by building these real prototypes that people could actually open source, use anywhere in the world. And it was a LARP. We were living in a society from the ground up. We had to use compost toilets. We had to build all the new cultures and protocols that would govern this civilization. And it was a really interesting way of bringing very different communities together who hadn't often pollinated. So we heard a little bit about this need for how do we manage hybrid teams. And very much here, you had people that were from a sort of maker engineering culture interacting with activists and artists and trying to build the etiquette for a new kind of society. Lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about alter egos, and the Amish. So one of the subcultures that I think we really need to shine more of a spotlight on is Luddite subculture. And I've spent a lot of time with Amish communities around the US. And really, compared to this framework of this sort of Lone Ranger cowboy entrepreneur, the Amish offer such a nice antidote within the sort of urgency of the tech scene, which is innovating without sort of want or need. The Amish are really thinking about slow adoption of technology. Beyond sort of the digital addiction things, how does that technology actually amplify what it means to be human? And so part of my experiments within this space have actually been to develop an alter ego, who I call Rebecca, who dresses as an Amish woman and goes to startup conferences and asks really simple and vulnerable and basic questions of technology founders to induce a much more existential agenda into technology development so that we don't just have meaningless apps getting developed. How do we create more intentional technologies? And at a personal level, as part of this own sort of identity hacking, if you will, it also allowed me to get, I think we all have this great elasticity of being that we don't actually channel. Maybe we conform to one specific script of who we have to be or who we're paid to show up as. So often we're camouflaging so many elements of ourselves. So for me, this was a powerful identity hack. But then it was also a wonderful way of getting startup founders to admit their own technophobias, to actually think more critically about the tools they're designing. So I know I'm out of time, but thank you.
I'm gonna borrow one microphone until I get mine, but please, come, Jane. So this was truly excellent, and I could see that you didn't know each other, but you were nodding at each other. Oh, Jane can take it. You were nodding at each other, and I'm sure that you wanted to also ask each other questions. I could see that you had found points in common. So I would like to ask one question of Elijah and then open it up to all of you, and you can ask questions to each other too. Elijah, I wanted to ask you, is there a way to design those cosmopolitan canopies?
Well, I mean, the canopy, by nature, it's organic. It develops. I came up with this concept in Philadelphia. I studied canopies I studied public spaces in Philadelphia, and specifically the Reading Terminal Market and Rittenhouse Square, and other spaces as well. And as you may know, Philadelphia has this really strange history of racial, ethnic competition, and history of racial subjugation, what have you. And somehow the Reading Terminal Market is this beautiful space where all different kinds of people come together and get along. It's unbelievable. So pleasant. You almost need a dose of it. And there are about 5 or 6 of these canopies in Philadelphia. I mean, there are cities and there are cities. I mean, some cities, New York, every street corner is like a canopy. In New Haven, we have about 2, In Philly, there are about 6. And there are these islands of civility in the sea of segregation, and they developed organically. I don't think you could really make a canopy. You could make a facsimile, but you couldn't make a true canopy, as it were.
You're nodding, Alexa. Did you want to say anything to it?
Yeah, it also makes me think about the spaces around the startup scene and technology development and how you have this tremendous privatization of space and resource amidst really segregated environments. And I was recently on a bus trip where we toured a number of Phoenix cities in the US, and we just visited 2 very different Americas. We would go in and we would be welcomed into these co-working spaces, which have this sort of agenda of inclusion that's not often there, or these technology incubators or hubs on the one side of town. And on the other side of town, you have all these incredible entrepreneurs who have absolutely no access to resource, who are forced more and more into informal and black market economies. And so I guess for me, the question is really, how do we think about creating more bridges? And I think that we have to apply more pressure onto those within the tech scene and within these emergent companies to actually not create this privatization of space. And you're seeing this with companies like Airbnb and Uber, who are really getting pushback from the public because they're not creating these hybrid spaces. They're privatizing resources. In San Francisco, if you work for Google, you have your own bus. And that's not in the spirit of the commons that I think a lot of previous enterprises actually had a social contract with people, with community.
I'll say one thing just to add on to that. I mean, it's important to know that these wonderful spaces exist, and the canopy as a concept is a kind of a metaphor for civil society. And though it's a beautiful space, it has fault lines. It's fault lines.
But I think that it's intrinsic to us as architects to think that we can make that happen. We can design it. So that's why, hence the question. So hopefully. Alexa was talking about bridges, Jane, and you were talking about interfaces. So interfaces, it's a different but same way to talk about stimulants for this kind of coming together of different cultures. So can you think of more interfaces that exist and that can link?
I think I can think about it in an abstract way around, I think the idea that I was mentioning about finding common ground that doesn't belong to a specific group, that feels it feels human maybe. And so I mean that's intrinsic to the work that I'm doing, is to try to find those patterns of behavior and prompts in the outside world that might be on a device, or they might be in a building, or they might be in a setting, that feel at their root human, that they have affordances that guide us to do things that we know how to do, like to enter, or to sit, or to congregate, or to separate. And I think that we need to look harder to find those deep human patterns to help us, so that we're not building by accident these exclusionary affordances in things that look like, well, they're right-handed or left-handed, or they start to separate us because we've just missed something rather subtle but common.
Thank you. Eric, I really love the fact that you said that you hate gravity, because in all my post-humanism, post-colonialism, I also had a post-gravity and said, no, I'm not going to put it in there, but I completely feel that that's what the space, the hybrid space between digital and physical really does. You said that when we're in video games, 99% of our feelings are real. And that doesn't surprise me. What surprised me was it was 99. What's that 1%?
Pain.
That's what I was thinking, but you know that there's the pain station. You're familiar with the pain station,
yeah,
video game.
It is different pain. I just wanted to go back to the subject of canopy, because this is actually very interesting. I mean, I'm learning a lot, like always. Every time I'm talking, I'm learning more than what I'm. What is a fantastic space is actually the video game space. The MMORPG. Sorry for the horrific acronym, but it's a society that is working and that is made with kids age 7, old woman. I'm playing a girl in World of Warcraft. I mean, this is kind of very interesting, because I am confronted to things that I will never be confronted into real life. And it's actually probably a very interesting sociological topic, because you're free. You are entirely free. You're hidden. You are not what you are in the game, but still you believe in yourself when you are in the game. And I think it's it could be a fascinating way
but not all games elicit the best out of you. There are some games. I mean, World of Warcraft is well known for being particularly positive games, but there are other spaces in which you can be you're right. In which you can be really a monster.
Yeah, of course, but this is experimental. I mean, this makes sense. The experimentation is probably one of the way of solving, you know, I don't know if some of you have seen the movie War Game, where there is yeah, it's a fantastic movie. Where there is a computer that is computing war all the time, every possible way of fighting. And ultimately, you know that nobody will win, whatever is happening. And I think that the video games are at this very interesting thing that everything is possible and every move is actually tracked and can be, you know, kind of... yeah, kind of
accounted
finding,
for.
Yeah, finding. Just quickly, a friend of mine said, like, it would be fantastic to actually make a game about how to make displacement into the Amazon warehouse. So it will be a game. And they will, and I'm certain that the solution will come from the players. They will find the most effective way of doing this thing. And this is a big part of hybridity, is that you can use all the resources in the world to solve a very single problem.
Ladja, you should do some field work in the video game space. Have you ever done any field work in the video game space?
Sort of.
Sort of. Mm-hmm.
I used to hang out in the arcade. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
And you could be an elf.
When I was waiting for a bigger decision, I just got addicted to these games. You know, that's a way to kill time.
But I think too, this idea of you playing a woman is interesting, and I think you see that in LARPing as well. And it's known.
By the way, sorry, I have to say, LARPing, for those of you who don't know, live action role playing games. Okay, just in case.
Yes. Okay. So, you know, there's this whole phenomenon in LARP that's called bleed, which is essentially when the character that you're playing, that personality begins to spill over into your own life. So I'm wondering for you, too, if you feel like there's actually, in playing this woman or in playing video games and getting in touch with these characters, if there are ways in which you're actually sort of accessing different parts of yourself, maybe even a femininity.
Yeah, and you with Rebecca also.
Yeah, in the game I'm skinny and I have lots of hair, so it's kind of cool. No, what is funny is that you never know who you are talking to, which is very interesting, because I know that sometimes you know, the kids age 7 are telling me that I look, you know, kind of stupid, which is, but I'm never sure. I mean, I can spot it because of the way it's written, but sometimes not that easy. And it's nice because you don't have a real reference. You don't exactly know what is happening because you don't know. First, they don't know who you are, and you don't know who they are. And it's building a community. So it's I mean, at some point, World of Warcraft had 9 million people. I mean, it's Greece. So it's and it was working better than Greece, actually.
So Alexa, what about you and Rebecca? What about the bleed?
There was definitely elements of bleed in Rebecca and myself. I feel like at this point I've integrated her, so maybe it's time to kill off the alter ego. But, you know, a lot of musicians will do this too. Like Beyonce had Sasha Fierce as her alter ego that she used to channel a sort of more brazen sexuality as a performer when she didn't feel entirely secure in that identity. So for me with Rebecca, it was actually a desire I went to Quaker school in Cambridge as a kid. And so I actually wanted to get in touch with this moral voice that I felt like I wasn't really allowed to use very often. And so she allowed me to do that, to just, rather than coming at people with facts and figures or sort of more aggressive provocations, to just do something that was really grounded and calm and vulnerable and curious, to definitely have this sort of heightened femininity that comes with wearing a bonnet and a prairie dress. But then to be able to sort of have this moral voice that I didn't have access to, and seeing how that created a confessional space for other people. And so that actually provided a tactic that I feel like now I've been able to use more in my work.
Jane, you wanted to say something? So, no.
I guess I'm really excited about this idea about getting in touch with different parts of oneself and thinking how hybridity seems to be such a human thing. And it makes me think about children and play, and the way that we introduce play in design environments as a way of breaking through, as a way of having empathy with other people that we're designing for, as a way of helping our clients think differently about the people that they're developing products or spaces for. And that aspect of play seems to, we haven't really talked about it except in the virtual games idea, but I think just the games people play as children, that's at the root of it, all of this making up being a different person and getting in touch with different sides of ourselves, which seems really, we take that away as we become adults and we become more fixed. And that leads to lots of problems.
Definitely, I think that, as Elijah said, we can use hybridity as a metaphor for so many different aspects of our life, civil society with the canopy, and also for cruelty. We didn't talk about chimeric individuals here, the ones that eat their twins in the womb. I mean, it's like the research that I had to throw away because I tried to concentrate everything. There are some creepy stories. I would like to open up to the audience because our 4 speakers here are quite amazing. Do you have any particularly poignant, really great questions that are going to spark discussions for years to come? All right, somebody's having a courage over there. Go ahead. Maybe introduce yourself, if you don't mind.
My name is Eli Keller. I'm a second-year Masters of Design student. This is a question, for everyone, but specifically for Eric and for Elijah. I think with technological progress, there's sort of infatuation with the new technology and a sort of forgetfulness toward what is left, and not to be too much of a conservative. But it relates to this idea of bleeding. That is, when we leave that hybrid space or the virtual space, how do we go back to reality? And I think the reason I'm pointing this at both of you, because I think these offensive moments that you were talking about, Elijah, are things that we are able to see in virtual space. That is, virtual space allows this lack of accountability for racist behavior, for offensive behavior. And then do you think that some of it might slide back to reality and then actually induce more of that in physical reality, in physical space?
Well, I think there's a basic tension in what I'm talking about, a tension in the canopy, both as a metaphor and as an actual setting place. And it's a tension between cosmo and ethno identities. The canopy, you see, speaking of hybridity, I mean, the cosmo and ethno operate in the same person sometimes. We code switch as people. We code switch. The canopy space encourages us to express our cosmos side and keep the ethno in check. So one of the questions is, in what circumstances does the ethno override the cosmo, you see, in people? Now, some people are hardcore cosmo, of course, and some people are hardcore ethno. And the people who are deeply ethno under the canopy or in civil society have to hide that ethno to some extent in order to operate and navigate that kind of space. But the gloss that they use can erode, you see. And that's, the shifting is what I see going on. People code switch. And of course, the empathy issue is there. A lot of other issues are there. And the world is certainly not perfect. And, it's a beautiful place, but there are fault lines. There's circumstances in which that stuff comes out, you see. That stuff comes out. And I guess the challenge for us as civil society advocates is how to squash it, how to deal with it, how to edify, educate, discourage these kinds of things, some way. Because they really help they serve to divide us as a society. They become deeply divisive, in their effect.
I like the fact that you're treating this hybrid space not as like a kind of nirvana, but as a place for possible discomfort. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting because it's important to be aware of the fact that it's a painful process no matter what.
Well, most times it's a beautiful place. The problem is that that moment of acute disrespect can happen any time, you see.
It's lurking. Other questions?
Now, thank you for this wonderful topic.
Also, introduce yourself.
I prefer not to be amplified. Can I just speak up? Because I don't think, can everybody hear me?
No, please use the mic.
Oh, so I have to be a hybrid. I'm forced to be a hybrid with this little weapon. This is a Centaurian concept. And
I'm sorry, a what? Centaurian?
Yes, centaur. If you go back to the classical idea of centaur, yes. So we're putting together concepts and mixing definitions. So I responded very much to each of the speakers in different ways. I think there are some discourses which are common and some which are very distant. I responded very much to the idea of praxis in your structuralist analysis of Jane, yes, and in a way you were closer to Elijah, who's also has an idea of praxis. I'm doing a summary, but then eventually I'll get to the question. Sorry.
You know, they had 7 minutes. You get 2.
Okay, sorry. I have a question for you, Paula. Do you think that the space in between is continuous to the concept of the hybrid, or is it actually antagonistic to it?
I think that it's a part of the process. So it's, I don't know whether to call it a byproduct or an enzyme or a humor that is secreted by the process. But I think that it is not in antagonism at all. I think it comes with it.
For me, it is, and I'm responding to your. I did read all your texts.
You didn't. It was only 35 of them.
The one text that I really can respond to very well is actually this drawing. Does everybody see that? Recognize this sketch by Leonardo of his anatomical study? So this idea of hybridity as being something new is, in a way, in my view, mistaken. It is a very old thing. That's why I call it Centaurian. And I think the idea of hybridity comes from even older ideas, such as horticulture, agriculture.
Yeah, actually, we decided to cut it from the presentation, but definitely the horticulture.
And going back to Elijah, horticulture is supreme because it can make the community work. Because if you take this...
I have to ask you to get to a question for them.
All right, so I have one good question, I think. I'm interested in between Alexa and Elijah. Alexa mentions something. Well, I think your talk was kind of socially deterministic. But anyway, you mentioned the black market, and I wonder if that is related to the idea of white space.
Okay, go ahead. Who wants to start?
Well. Why don't you start?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely there's a whole sort of racialization history involved with the black market, and even the word sort of deviance, and the way in which a lot of these kinds of informal entrepreneurs carry with them certain, adjectives that have been used as sort of tools of structural oppression. Back in the day, it used to be the sort of deserving and undeserving poor. As a category for policing. Yeah.
The question is, how do you relate to the other discourse in terms of your discourse? Because I think they're very, very different.
Well, the idea of white space is ambient. I mean, it's all about when you leave the ghetto, you move through the perceptual white space. To most black people, this would be a white space. This would be a white space. It's a perceptual category, but you know that in the white space, depending on the class of the people, depending on their proclivities towards violence, what have you, you're at risk. It's a sad thing to acknowledge, but that's what many, many black people hold in their view. So as you navigate the white space, it's incumbent on you to work to disabuse people of the idea that the ghetto stereotypes from the iconic ghetto apply to you. So the people who do this successfully oftentimes have this ability to be facile with respect to dancing, so to speak, in the white space. And to the extent that you're competent to do that, then you can be successful. Obama is a fantastic dancer.
That's a good way. No, sorry, Carlos. I need to give space to somebody else.
Can I just say quickly, just to the point, I very much would say I relate to your discourse and your diagnosis. There was one gangster I interviewed who described whenever he saw police, how he had to behave like he was on safari and there was, a predatory animal there. Or even, when we had our book launch, it was interesting because half the room was startup founders, and we sort of took over what was maybe a white space, and the other half of the room were sort of actors from the black market economy, members of the Latin Kings who were there, George Young, who was a former sort of big drug kingpin, and I think that space was problematic in some ways, but also really interesting in this sort of cultural mashup that doesn't really happen. And so for me, I think my discourse is less about a sort of systemic diagnosis and more about an invitation to empathy. And how do we create those invitations for people? If we can show Silicon Valley that there's a narrative of entrepreneurship within black market economies, maybe that provides an initial bridge for more conversation and more access of resource.
Yeah, you're looking for the bridge always. I like how Alex is inciting us all to take over all these different alter egos. I mean, after speaking with you, I'm going to form at least 3. More questions? Okay, one here, and then I've seen you. First here, and then we'll come to you.
Hi, my name's Juliette Fritsch. I'm Chief of Education and Interpretation at the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem. And the interpretation part of my job title is a sort of museum-y, heritage-focused thing. But what it's really about is all the ways that you communicate to visitors what a site or a museum exhibition is about. And one of the things that this talk has made me think about is first-person interpretation, role-playing, which a million years ago, when I used to work at historic royal palaces in the UK, which includes the Tower of London and Hampton Court Palace, the first thing I had to do, the first day of my new job at that place, was write a very formal proposal to the accounting department about why it was important for the kitchen archaeologists, who were first-person interpreters who lived in Hampton Court kitchens for a month at a time, as people would have lived in the 16th and 17th century cooking, needed to use original grains, original kinds of meat in order to be authentic in their work, because they considered what they were doing to be very serious research. And at that time, which was 15 years ago, that was considered really out there and really strange and kind of playful, but not really part of mainstream discourse of research. And 15 years later, and famously, people who work in this are not interested in first-person interpretation, but it's very important, the audience reaction and how audiences interact with those kind of people. And I'm wondering about, Alexa, your Rebecca, how did people respond to her? What is the outcome of what you were talking about? Because you talked very much about what it meant for you, but I'm interested in what the outcome was for the other people interacting with that.
Yeah, I think there's a range of reactions. I think first is one of just sort of staring, because when you see someone in a bonnet and in plain clothes, particularly when everyone's sort of in this gadgeted startup kind of attire, it's really noticeable. So I think there's initially a lot of staring, and then I do think there's a confessional moment that gets created. So for a lot of people, you know, there's a sort of nostalgia for, oh, couldn't we live in simpler times? Or actually, I really don't want this cyborg future to exist. I don't know why I'm working at Google, but I really just want to move, you know, back to the land. And even a lot of internet sort of folks that were really involved in the early stages of the internet and became very disenchanted with what the internet became, are, you know, a lot that I've spoken to have sort of channeled into more of a hermit life. You know, they're going off the grid and sort of have become disenchanted with that sort of utopian dream of technology. And then I think the third thing is one of existential crisis. You know, at a conference where I was doing a performance as Rebecca, someone just said, yeah, the things I'm working on are completely meaningless. So now what? And so for me, that's a ripe conversation around intentional technology development. And you know, how do we build even a critical thinking curriculum for startup founders so that the things they're developing is much more socially attuned?
I have a question for Elijah based on what you just mentioned, Paula, about alter egos. And it seems like, you mentioned two kinds of identities, Cosmo and Ethno. And there was a duality there, but you also mentioned that at a certain point, the Cosmo can disappear and people revert to the Ethno. So the thing that I was wondering was about construction of identities and alter egos. And to you, is the Ethno more innate and less constructed than the Cosmo? Because it seemed like there was that idea. But it also seems very problematic to think that you are locked into an identity naturally. And also to the artist formerly known as Rachel, I'm wondering which sort of side of this is more constructed than the other for you?
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. I think it is pretty natural to be parochial and ethnocentric and racially and ethnically particularistic. I think that's
Actually, I was suggesting the opposite, that it's more natural. If you look at children, they're not necessarily ethnocentric. They're more open to diversity. They actually haven't learned or constructed the biases that emerged later on.
See, the thing about the canopy, the canopy is kind of a school. I mean, it's like an edifying institution. And to the extent that you engage the canopy, you can be the most parochial person. But if you have enough experience under the canopy with all this diversity that you've got to engage day in, day out, you become marginally more sophisticated for having done so, you see. Because you just can't do those things that you might want to do and say and still be accepted under the canopy, you see. So if you're ethnocentric or parochial and you go to the canopy and work, I mean, there's the sense in which you should get some credit for doing that, you know. The problem is there are circumstances under which the gloss erodes and your thing comes out, you see.
Now, I know this prompts me to ask you, do also the canopies bleed? Like, is what happens in the canopy then can bleed out in the real world, right, and expand?
Absolutely. There's a sense in which our country's a canopy. There's a sense in which Philadelphia's a canopy. There's a sense in which Starbucks is a canopy, or can be, if you follow me. But of course, we have fault lines. You see, fault lines. These eruptions in which the canopy becomes rented. But the canopy is so full of gloss that it can spew out the gloss, and then it recovers. You see, and then we wait for another time. But there's this tension between the cosmo and the ethno, and sometimes these are in the same person. You see.
I can take one more questions. Yeah. Okay, I'll get there because you already have the microphone also. Okay, all right, go for it.
Hello. I just have a question about, or maybe not for one specific person, but maybe we should talk a little bit more about terminology and language. And I'm reminded of Against Method by Paul Fehrenbund, where he just talks about that most things that have been discovered happened because they didn't follow any rules. They just happened. And that architecture, and a professor of mine in undergrad used to always talk about this book, that actually architecture is about against method, that you actually can't follow something to a T in order to produce something. And the same has to go with some of the readings that were given to us in terms of how nature doesn't always follow its own method. And I wonder if the methodologies in which we talk about actually are rooted in a really specific language that has to go back with the naming devices of all these things, the post, the pre, the a priori kind of understandings, that maybe it's a provocation to just rewrite the actual dictionary of these individual things in order to understand what this new commonality is. So it's not necessarily a direct question to it, but perhaps someone will have something to say about language or diction.
I don't know whether I have something to say about the language. I was kind of actually interested in the question of the sort of what was natural, because we are getting back to some pretty basic stuff about people and the way people feel and behave, and give expression to themselves. And I was thinking the canopy and the cosmo and the ethno thing are an interesting contrast, but it seems to me that it connects to what environment, because we're socially connected people, depending on what kind of social values we're tapped into, we change. So we sometimes are comfortable giving voice to those non-technical things, or my ethnocentrism. But sometimes that's an inappropriate kind of value, and we're pretty sensitive to assessing when those are called upon, because they're rooted in our own survival, it seems, as social animals. So it felt, going back to children, that there's so much more to do with what we allow and the kind of environment that we're becoming familiar with, and that we're helping each other get familiar with, that we want to be providing environments that benefit more social connection. I heard recently a lovely quote about how diversity is our world's is one of the greatest strengths, but inclusion is our biggest challenge. And I thought there was a lot in that, because we value it, but we have a great deal of difficulty creating the kinds of environments that foster it. Yeah.
Which is a great way to.
Just to speak to that, I mean, and to go over what I said before, the city can be conceptualized in terms of white space, black space, and the racially mixed space, and it's very important to appreciate that these are in flux, and they're changing all the time. But white people typically avoid the black space, but black people have to navigate the white space as a condition of our existence. You see, we have to navigate the white space, and so.
Or worse, white people penetrate the black space and transform it into white.
Well, in gentrification, we have that. You see, and people calling the police on black people, they invade.
Well, this is so huge, but thankfully we can keep on talking with a drink. But these are all really huge topics, which is a testament to the fact that these salons only begin conversations and never exhaust them in any way. And the nomenclature question makes a lot of sense, because so many words come to mind, from hybridity, from the word hybridity, and we can go on talking forever. But I would like to thank Chantel Blakely here from the GSD for helping putting all this together. Thank you so much. And of course, I would like to thank Mohsen Mostafavi for hosting us. But more than anybody, I would like to thank these great, amazing 4 speakers, Rick, Alexa, Elijah, and Jane. And don't go away, because there's drinks and crackers and cheese outside, and you can talk to them directly if you want. So thank you very much for coming tonight.